Bunlar biliyoruz. Hı.
Özgür Hocam başladık.
Tamam, peki. Yes, welcome to the International Symposium on Economic Thoughts again. You know, we are on live our YouTube channel. If you're ready, you can start your presentation, and at the end of the presentation, I will direct you question, if any, on our YouTube channel. We are on you now.
Thank you. Good morning to all the participants to this symposium. I'm very glad that RePEcT invited me to join for the second year this international symposium. And I'm very glad that I have chance to discuss something on history of economic thought after many years. Actually, my latest works are more in political economy, but I have written a lot in the past on history of economic thought, and I'm glad that I can have again a chance to touch some of my favorite topics, and in particular the relationship between Schumpeter and the Austrian school. So thanks to the organizers, and I hope that I will give a meaningful contribution to this discussion. But if you don't find my presentation up to your expectations, please bear with me. So the title of today's talk is How Schumpeterian is the Austrian School of Economics. Obviously, a little bit of a provocative title for several reasons that I'm going to explain in a very short while. So I mention here what I called the Schumpeter dilemma. We all know that Schumpeter was an Austrian economist in the sense that he was Austrian by birth. He was a contemporary of Ludwig von Mises. Mises was born in 1881 and Schumpeter in 1883. And Schumpeter studied with Eugen von Bembawerk and attended the famous Bembawerk seminar. But in history of economic thought, always we have asked if Schumpeter was or not a member of the Austrian School of Economics because of his very original and unique positions. And indeed, there is quite a general agreement among the historians in answering that no, Schumpeter was not a member of the Austrian School of Economics. But even if the question seems to be a little bit settled within the discipline, I think that it is worth to repeat this, because in a very recent book, in example, so Yannick Wasserman in his Marginal Revolutionaries keep on mentioning Schumpeter as a member of the Austrian school. So he keep on treating Schumpeter as a member. So even in recent literature, there are misunderstandings about these issues. According to other scholars, Schumpeter was closer to the German historical school. I mean, I may agree on it. We all know that he was a close friend of Arthur Spiethoff, and that was Spiethoff in sponsoring Schumpeter in Bonn against Mises' application. We know how history was important for Schumpeter. We know how Schumpeter called for a social economy a la Weber. And even actually, we had recent scholars like Nobel laureate Edmund Phelps that called Schumpeter the last member of the German historical school. This was in Mass Flourishing, published in 2013. Obviously, this is an exaggeration. I would never subscribe the statement that Schumpeter was the last member of the German historical schools, but unfortunately Edmund Phelps got a lot of things wrong about Schumpeter. Not only this, but in example, Schumpeter was Schumpeter innovations are treated in Phelps as exogenous factor, but they are not. Obviously, for Schumpeter, innovations are very endogenous. Sorry. Give me a second. Okay. So Schumpeter was influenced, obviously, both by the Austrian school and the German historical school, and was in a dynamic dialectic relationship with both the schools. But I claim he was neither a full member of one of these two schools. We can simply say that Schumpeter was Schumpeterian. Schumpeter was Schumpeter and Schumpeterian, and indeed probably we even cannot say that there is a Schumpeterian economic school. Schumpeter was probably too eclectic to give birth to a school. So here I will try instead to reverse the question, not if Schumpeter was and at which extent he was a member of the Austrian school, but if there are Schumpeterian elements in the Austrian School of Economics. So how Schumpeterian is the Austrian School of Economics? So please keep in mind that this is a provocative question. So this presentation doesn't have the aim to demonstrate anything in a very final way or definitive way. I will just try to present some hints that can become the base, hopefully, for future research, and to try to find more elements of contaminations between these huge, great, immense scholar, which is Schumpeter, and the very eclectic developments that happen in the Austrian schools, also after Mises and Hayek in more recent times. So the first aspect that I will analyze is the relationship between economics and history. We all know that there was a certain misunderstanding created by the Methodenstreit with regard to the relationship between economics and history for the Austrian economists. For Menger, economics deals with human actions and interactions, and it goes much beyond the collection of statistics. Menger had very clear the role of complexity in economic analysis, but Menger never denied the importance of history for economic theorizing and never reasoned in terms of a dichotomy between economics and history. So somehow the Methodenstreit was a misunderstanding that Schumpeter called wasted energies. Okay. However, it seems that in certain passages, in certain parts of Human Actions in 1949, Mises reintroduced a sort of dichotomy between what he called praxeology, as the study of human action, and themology, as the study of understanding, which belongs more to the realm of history. And in certain passages, he is very sharp, very strong, very too strong in discussing praxeology and theory as an a prioristic discipline, or even an axiomatic and therefore strictly deductive discipline. So there are contrasting interpretations at this regard with regard to the Misesian dealing with history and economics. So if he was seeing more a distinction or a dichotomy. And Don Lavoie and Virgil Storr, in a very brilliant paper in 2011, tried to clarify this, explaining that for Mises, theory had to explain reality and had to find its inspiration within reality, and therefore it is not alien from history and historical facts. In fact, and here I quote directly Ludwig von Mises and Human Action, Mises says that the end of science is to know reality. Therefore, praxeology restricts its inquiries to the study of acting under those conditions and presuppositions which are given in reality. Experience merely directs our curiosity towards certain problems and diverts it from other problems. It tells us what we should explore, but it does not tell us how we could proceed in our search for knowledge. So in these passages, indeed, I can find an important parallel with Schumpeter's emphasis on the role of what Schumpeter called vision and the relationship between vision and economic theorizing. In the history of economic analysis, Schumpeter writes that when we start our research work, we should first have to visualize a distinct set of coherent phenomena as a worthwhile object of our analytical efforts. In our words, analytical effort is, of necessity, preceded by a pre-analytic cognitive act that supplies the raw material for the analytic effort. And this pre-analytic effort is called by Schumpeter as the vision. And here you see these two passages between Schumpeter and Mises are very, very similar. Somehow, observation of reality, our impact with reality, tells us where our theorizing should move to. So the economist is not an observer who is alien to reality. He or she lives in a specific conditions of place and time. And it is thanks to this interaction with reality and the observation of reality, typical of the conditions of time and place, that the vision is shaped. Therefore, the analytical effort is the attempt to convert the vision into concepts, into a scheme, so then to build a theory indeed. And this brings us back to Mises and the Austrians in general, to their attempt according to which economic science is and aims to understand reality. And I believe that somehow this link between the Austrians and Schumpeter is clarified and completed by Ludwig Lachmann and his attempt to reprise the Weberian research program grounded on the concept of Verstehen. Lachmann published this interesting little book called The Legacy of Max Weber, in which etymology and praxeology are distinct but complementary for a proper study of human action. And just to avoid a misunderstanding, Mises was very much into this line, but because of the intellectual environment in which he was writing, that was very much influenced by positivism, and he was trying to write against positivism and historicism, Mises seems to fall into some statements that can be misunderstood. So Lachmann development is not against Mises, but is built on Mises, I would say, and completed with the Weberian influence that was obviously also very strong on Schumpeter. In fact, Ludwig Lachmann is, for me, the more German among the Austrians. He was German by birth, indeed, and he developed what has been called the hermeneutical turn in economics, in which he stresses the importance of Verstehen, or understanding, and the role of interpretation as the linking point between the linking bridge between facts and ideas. So we cannot have progress and evolution of reality within interpretation. And therefore, he develops what has been called economics as a science of meaning, whereby economics as a science of meaning follows the same method as history, which means looking for meanings, purposes, or plans that lays behind facts of reality. The Lachman research program was then developed by Don Lavoie, and Don Lavoie unfortunately passed away too young at 50 because of cancer, if I'm not mistaken. And he developed an interpretative economics to be used against the emerging objectivism in our science. And for him, economics was a forum for the open contention among interpretations of theory and history. Thanks to this effort, there was a renewed importance of subjectivism and methodological individualism, on which, just to remember, Schumpeter wrote beautiful pages in his very first book, Das Wesen, that was published when he was just 25 in 1908. So, according to Lavoie, economic phenomena are explained by reference to the subjective meaning attached to them by individual minds. And David Prichitko, one of the Lavoie students, explained that there are indeed two levels of interpretations. There is the level of interpretations that each individual attached to the interpretation of facts. And then there is another level when economists interpret economic facts, creating abstract concepts and categories out of these interpretations. So like when the economists observe the reality and see their intended consequences, like the market order, in example. So it seems to me that late members of the Austrian school, in particular those influenced by Lachman and Lavoie, found it a way toward a new synthesis, building both on Misesian roots and also, I'm sure we can find there in Schumpeterian legacy. So interpretation and the search for meaning cannot be separated by the very facts to which meaning is attached, according to this new synthesis. History molds the direction of theoretical investigation, while theory is used as the interpretative framework with which the specific historical narratives can be told. And history becomes somehow the suppliers of facts, events, action, and interactions on which the economists need to place his or her interpretational lens. So finally, Don Lavoie, with a paper that was only published in 2011, explained that what can happen, so theory, shapes the way we work on the evidences when we ask what did happen, means the history. What did happen influences the agendas of economists, orienting the choice among the specific what can happen that have to be asked. So if economics is a science of meaning, then the method of interpretation advocated by Lachman and Lavoie becomes the new bridge between historical facts and economic theorizing. So following Lachman research program, Don Lavoie and Birgit Storr, but also David Prichitko and others, explain that the category of understanding is the one that allows us to reconcile the two branches of social sciences, theory and history, into a unified effort for studying human meanings. And I'm sure that Schumpeter would have liked this. Then I move into the second part of this presentation, the second theoretical realm in which I try to find a relationship between Schumpeter and the Austrians. And this is entrepreneurship. Obviously, we can't talk about Schumpeter without talking of entrepreneurship. And the obvious comparison is always between Schumpeter theory of economic development and Kirchner's book on entrepreneurship published in 1973. Often, these two approaches have been presented as opposite, as very different approaches to entrepreneurship. On one side, we have Kirchner with his alert entrepreneurship as alertness to previously unexploited profit opportunities. And on the other, we have Schumpeter, according to which entrepreneurship is the introduction of new combinations. So I think that the two most important differences are at this regard on the entrepreneur. For Schumpeter, the entrepreneur is always a special human being, okay, the innovator, and the way in which he describes this in the second chapter of the Theory of Economic Development is very fascinating. While for Kirchner, who was writing following Mises, entrepreneurship is somehow a basic feature of human action. The second main difference is with regard to equilibrium. In Schumpeter, entrepreneurial action is an action that drives the system away from equilibrium. In Kirchner, instead, the entrepreneurial function moves the system toward a higher degree of planned coordination. So it is an equilibrative force if we intend equilibrium in an Hayekian sense. So equilibrium has planned coordination. However, I believe that we can also find some important points of contact, common points. First of all, there is both in Schumpeter and Kirchner the delusion for the neoclassical equilibrium approach. In both books, we find the attempt to build a dynamic theories to move beyond neoclassical equilibrium. Secondly, entrepreneurs are both for Schumpeter and Kirchner, they are both at the core of their theory. So for Schumpeter, the entrepreneur is the core of the development theory, and for Kirchner is at the core of the market approach. So both Schumpeter's entrepreneur and Kirchner and Mises' homo agents are in contrast with Robin's homo economicus. And third, in both situations, profit arises from disequilibrium and represent the entrepreneur's remuneration and nothing to do with the remuneration of capital or the productivity of capital. So entrepreneurs are in their action, they found profit as their remunerations. I believe that both entrepreneurial approaches, entrepreneurial ideas can coexist if we start by calling Kirchner's theory not an entrepreneurship theory, but an alertness theory. So the framework is a framework in which markets are characterized by ignorance, and economic agents define their sets of ends and means consistently with their expectations and their limited content of knowledge. In doing so, they trigger the market process and the never-ending processes of information exchange and revising plans. So this is a typical Austrian framework. In this framework, individuals are alert to profit opportunities and they learn from experience. The acquisition of new information arising from the interaction between the subject and the surrounding reality generates new knowledge via never-ending interpretative processes. And among these economic actors, special types can actually arise. So Schumpeter's entrepreneurs, according to my humble point of view, can arise from Kirchnerian alertness, driving the economic system toward change. So if alertness is a special attitude arising from the Misesian context of purposeful human action, then new combination can become a subset of alertness, something stronger than what was previously known. So Schumpeterian entrepreneurs, for me, are fully consistent with the human action model. They are, like Kirchnerian entrepreneur, alert to unnoticed profit opportunities, and they need to set up their own ends means frameworks. but the kinds of plans and set of actions that they carry out are different because of the special consequences that they bring into the economic system, the disruption. And this is a practical difference, not a theoretical difference from the Kirchnerian alertness. Okay, just the consequences of these actions are more disruptive than other entrepreneurial actions. And in Kirchner 1999, we can find indeed the awareness of a potential compatibility between the two visions. In example, Kirchner stressed how Schumpeter's view is valid in order to understand the psychological profile typical of the real-world entrepreneur and the creative distraction which Schumpeter saw as the central and distinguishing feature of the capitalistic system. Kirchner also recognized that alertness required that boldness, self-confidence, and creativity and innovative ability that are described by Schumpeterian entrepreneurship. Also, Kirchner accepted the special psychological attitude that is necessary for entrepreneurship typical of Schumpeter vision. Schumpeter extensively discussed the hostility that entrepreneurs have to face when they introduce new innovation. And this is recognized by Kirchner when Kirchner wrote that abstract prescience must be supported by psychological qualities that encourage one to ignore conventional wisdom, to dismiss the jeers of those deriding what they see as the self-deluded visionary, to disrupt what others have come to see as the comfortable familiarity of the old-fashioned ways of doing things, to ruin rudely and even cruelly the confident expectations of those whose somnolence has led them to expect to continue to make their living as they have for years past. This is, I think, the most Schumpeterian passage that we can find in Kirchner. This is like recognizing that the entrepreneur is the Schumpeter entrepreneur. Okay, and this is written almost 30 years after the first book in which Kirchner started to discuss entrepreneurship. So it seems to me that there is a gradual reconciliation that Kirchner wanted to show between him and Schumpeter. So Schumpeterian entrepreneurship, characterized by leadership and innovation, can be seen as a special action arising from the Kirchnerian concept of alertness as related to the Misesian approach to human action, but it is brought out by special type of humans, the entrepreneurs, and with radical consequences which are not simply for the market process itself, but also for the general economic development process. So I think that we can imagine an alertness or Kirchnerian theory in which human beings as homo agents define their ends-means framework and their plans. The interaction between these homo agents defines the market process, which is characterized by ignorance reduction and plans revision and coordination. But among such plans, some are entrepreneurial or disruptive plans brought out by Schumpeterian entrepreneurs and define economic change. In a paper that I published last year, but I hinted this also in a book that I published 5 years ago, not in this complete way, I defined this Venn diagram. You can see we have the macro category of Misesian human action. Kirchnerian entrepreneurship or alertness is a subset of Misesian human action. So those actions that emerge as alertness to previously unexploited profit opportunities. And Schumpeterian innovation, Schumpeterian entrepreneurship intended as innovation, is a subset of Kirchnerian alertness. Obviously, Schumpeterian entrepreneurs are alert to previously unexploited profit opportunities, but the consequences, the practical consequences of their action are, in a way, more radical and disruptive. So I'm quite happy with this diagram, and I think and I hope that can be used for further development and reconciliations among these approaches. Before I close this discussion about entrepreneurship, kindly allow me to spend a little bit of words also to see a link between Schumpeter and Hayek on the role of knowledge. When Schumpeter discusses the entrepreneurial attitude or knowledge, he says that it is more by will than by intellect that leaders fulfill their function, more by authority, personal weight, and so forth than by original ideas. And also he adds that it is not part of the entrepreneurial function to find or to create new possibilities. They are always present, abundantly accumulated by all sorts of people. So the role of entrepreneur is not the one of inventing things, but the one of doing things. Again, Schumpeter says you can always have the new combination, but it is the act and the force to act that is indispensable and decisive. The decisive moment is therefore energy and not merely the insight. The latter is much more frequent, without leading to even the most simple act. What matters is the disposition to act. It is the ability to subjugate others and to utilize them for this purpose in order to prevail that leads to successful deeds, even without particularly brilliant intelligence. Here I think that when Schumpeter tells us that entrepreneurial knowledge has not to be confused with technical knowledge or inventing things, we can find a link with Hayek. And I always explain the two types of knowledge that Hayek introduced with the example of opening a pizzeria, a pizza shop. Which kind of knowledge do you need to start and successfully run a pizzeria? First of all, technical knowledge. So someone needs to know how to make a pizza. But then you need also entrepreneurial knowledge, which Hayek calls the knowledge of conditions of time and place, which means which kind of customers should I target, at which price should I sell, how many people should I hire, so on and so forth. Technical knowledge is technical, scientific, available to many, centralized, expressed in formulas or processes and principles, pre-existing and can be communicated via formal teaching and learning. While entrepreneurs do not need technical knowledge in themselves. They don't need to possess that technical knowledge. They can hire someone to make the pizza. Instead, entrepreneurial knowledge is subjective and practical, exclusive, dispersed throughout the minds of all men, tacit and not expressed in words, created ex nihilo, from nothing. And it can be transmitted only unconsciously via extremely complex social processes, which are mediated by prices. And this is the knowledge that entrepreneurs need. And it seems to me that somehow in this, maybe unconsciously, Hayek walks on Schumpeter's footsteps. This is a provocation. It would be very difficult to demonstrate how much here Hayek is influenced by Schumpeter, but at least we can notice a sort of parallelism in the way in which they see entrepreneurial features, which are very much distinguished by technical knowledge. So the entrepreneur is not the person that knows how to do things from a technical perspective, but is the one that has the will and the force and the power and the intuition to take right decisions. Last part of these presentations will be obviously on business cycles. So at the first look, it may seem that Schumpeter's business cycle theory and the one developed by the Austrian School of Economics by Mises and Hayek have nothing in common. But so at the root of the Schumpeter's one, we find the very famous triad, new combinations or innovations, new man or entrepreneur, new money or the banker as the effort of modern economy. In the traditional Austrian view, instead, we find malinvestment generated by credit expansion. Again, here we have new money. So somehow the money creation is important for both the approaches. We know that in the conventional view, the Austrian theory is presented as a theory in which at the root we found a money interest rate that is below the natural interest rate. And while for Mises, it is very crucial the fact that central banks lowers artificially the interest rate. For Hayek, and this is a very profound difference with Mises, the natural interest rate can be above the money rate, also because it is pushed up by positive profit expectation and therefore by an increased demand for loanable funds. And this can happen without money manipulation from the central bank. So obviously there is no influence of Schumpeter on the first book in which Mises discussed business cycles, the theory of money and credit. But the two books are somehow contemporary and they come from the same intellectual milieu. One element is very important, and I want to stress it here, that money creation plays an important role in Schumpeter, obviously. This is very important, but it is obviously at the root of all the Austrian tradition of business cycles. We can say that both approaches work in parallel at this regard. In the Misesian tradition, money creation is at the root of business cycle in a negative way, yes, but yet it is there. In Schumpeter, business cycles are generated by new combinations, which in turns are carried out by entrepreneurs. But entrepreneurs can do that only if they are financed by the bankers. And Schumpeter clearly talks about money creation. These money are not coming from saving, but by money creation. And this third element of the triad in Schumpeter theory is too often disregarded, but it is very crucial. But a deeper connection, I think, happens between Schumpeter and the Hayekian tradition on business cycle theory. Contrary with the Mises one, Hayek's approach is not a purely monetary one, but a semi-monetary one. In particular, if we look at the first book that Hayek published on business cycle, Hayek 1929, Money and the Trade Cycle, in which he clearly mentioned that the natural rate can be above the money rate because of positive profit expectations. And I quote Hayek here, the reasons for this can be of very different kinds. New inventions of discovery, the opening up of new markets, or even bad harvests, the appearance of entrepreneurs of genius who originate new combinations. And here Hayek, between brackets, directly quote, say this is coming from Schumpeter, and a fall of wage rates due to heavy immigration. So maybe somehow we have Hayek, we have Schumpeter that influenced Hayek first, and then Hayek that influenced the later work of Schumpeter, the business cycles of 1939. But also on this further investigation, I think deserves attention. So it seems to me that there is a Schumpeterian echo in the Hayek's version of the Austrian theory of business cycle. And the echo is represented by the emphasis on the role of expectations. Profit expectations are key for Schumpeter in leading to new combinations, and therefore new combinations develop cycles. We know that the entrepreneur is not only the one that brings about innovations, but innovations generate business cycles. But profit expectations are a key element for Hayek in order to generate, via entrepreneurial spirit, the difference between money and natural rate of interest. This is very different with the Misesian approach. And later on, this emphasis on the role of expectations is very much emphasized again by Ludwig Lachmann and his followers. So this tradition is further pushed, further developed by Lachmann. Hayek emphasis on the role of profit expectations will become more evident in Hayek 1939, another book that has been very much disregarded when we discuss the Austrian theory of business cycles, in which Hayek says that the rate of profit, rather than a rate of interest, in the strict sense, dominates the explanation of fluctuations. Many Austrian scholars should rediscover this, and I suggest that the more important writings of Hayek on business cycles are Hayek 1929, 1933, and 1939, rather than the series of lectures that he developed in the London School of Economics and that were collected in Prices and Production in 1931. 1931, Prices in Production is very much a Misesian book, but all the other writings of Hayek on business cycles, 1929, 33, and 39, are more centered on the role of expectations and the role of profit expectations to explain fluctuations, and therefore they can be more useful to find and to build a link, a bridge between Schumpeter and the Austrian school. And I wrote a couple of works that are mentioned here, in which I try to develop a new approach to business cycles, which I call the doctrine of the natural cycle, which is the attempt to further strengthen the Austrian business cycle theory with elements coming from Schumpeter. For the ones that have troubles in finding the way to fall asleep at night, you can read my works on this topic. So I come to conclusions. So I'm running out of time. So Schumpeter is not Austrian, not German, but is Schumpeterian, and was influenced by both the Austrian school and the German historical school, and he himself influenced both of these schools. And I believe that this can be seen, among other things, in three aspects. First of all, the relationship between economics and history, the theory of entrepreneurship, and business cycle theory. With regard to the relationship between economics and history, I mentioned that the Methodenstreit was somehow a misunderstanding, that there is an ambiguity in the relationship between etymology and praxeology in Mises, but when we read Mises, we can also find a link with a Schumpeterian vision, because both they stress the importance of observing reality. And Lachmann further developed the Misesian's hint and influence from Weber to develop a reconciliation between history and economics, developing an economics as a science of meaning, and the category of understanding as a bridge between what can happen and what did happen. With regard to entrepreneurship, I suggest that there is only an apparent dichotomy between Kirchner and Schumpeter, while instead many common elements can be found, and a certain reconciliation can be found if we look at the new combinations as a subset of alertness. Furthermore, Hayek's two types of knowledge seems to suggest a Schumpeterian heritage with reference to the role of the knowledge and characteristics that entrepreneurs should possess to be successful. Finally, with regard to business cycles, we can find a parallelism between Schumpeter's cycle theory and the Hayekian version of the Austrian business cycle theory. And this parallelism is centered on the role of expectations in generating innovative processes, which in turn can move the natural rate of interest above the money one. And finally, on the central role of the rate of expectations on the rate of profit, which is in Hayek, and this is very much Schumpeterian. With this, I conclude my presentation. See, there are some references. I hope that was an insightful presentation, and that other scholars will find here material for further research and investigation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your valuable contribution, dear Ferlito. I think it's very successful presentation in terms of being the first speech of the symposium. Please let me see, is there any question on our YouTube channel? So please, let's wait a few seconds because there is a time difference between Zoom and YouTube. Also, you know, let me see, please. Okay, there is no question for now. Thank you very much for your participation and also your support. We are hoping to with the new projects in the next.
Thank you very much, and all the success for the symposium.
Thank you.